and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great show for you. We're going to talk a little about water quality on our show today and just how important that is whenever you're mixing herbicides, fungicides, and especially biologicals, or as we would call them, natural products, into water. Water quality is a major key. We'll talk about what to look for on your farm.
And one of the things I like about agriculture is how colorful it is in the summer, getting out into the fields. I see the blooms and all these pretty things, but if I split open soybean stems and I see orange inside, I'm alarmed, and that's because I'm seeing the soybean gall midge larvae. We'll talk about this terrible insect coming up on today's show.
Also coming up on today's show, we've got an iron talk for you, a weed of the week as well. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
The corn we planted early February have all good emergence. So far, we can't find any condition that the wheels haven't worked. I can just say that.
Closing the seed trench behind the planter is essential to establishing yields in the fall. Introducing the Germinator Closing Wheel from Farm Shop MFG. Designed and built by a farmer who is tired of seeing poor stands because of uneven emergence, the Germinator is here to give your crop the strong start it needs for maximum yield. For more information, visit us at farmshopmfg.com.
In today's Farm Basics, we'll discuss what a growing degree day or growing degree unit is and why that's important for farmers.
As a farmer, one of the things I want to know is which hybrid of corn can I plant and it will make it to maturity in the fall, so it's not too early or too late. I also would like to know when can I expect certain insects will come out of the ground? When can I expect certain weeds will come out of the ground? That's super important for me as a farmer.
And the reason that all these things are a big deal is timing is really important for planting and treating that crop throughout the season. So what farmers will do is they will actually calculate how much heat that they're gaining each day during the growing season to see where they're at and what they need to prepare for.
Yep, so this is called growing degree days, or some people will refer to it as growing degree units, or GDU for short.
All you need is a day like today that's above 50 degrees and you're going to start accumulating some of these growing degree units. And the way you calculate this is you take the high temperature for the day plus the low temperature for the day, divide that by 2 and subtract 50, because 50 is the base. Now there are just two little qualifiers here. The high temperature, 86, is the max, and the low temperature, 50, is the minimum. So if you had a day that was 90 degrees for a high and 45 degrees for a low, you just use 86 for the high and 50 for the low.
Okay, so let's just say you did have an 86 degree high and a 50 degree low. What are we talking about here? Well, 86 plus 50 is 136. You divide that by 2, that's going to give you 68. Subtract off 50, that would be 18 growing degree days.
So how does that really equate to corn? Brian mentioned we want to pick the right corn hybrid. We plant a lot of 100-day corn on our farm. Well, what does 100-day corn mean? Well, it means it's somewhere around 2,000 GDUs, give or take 100 or 2. So we're looking for around 2,000 GDUs. Now we've got some friends that farm in other parts of the country further south. Well, they have a growing season that has over 6,000 GDUs. Well, they could raise that 100-day corn at least twice. So
if not 3 times.
They've got a couple of turns they could have, and oftentimes in those growing areas, they'll do double cropping, where they'll plant one crop in the spring or in the fall, and they'll harvest it in the summer, then they'll plant another crop and be able to harvest that in the fall. So it depends on where you're at in the country as to how many of these growing degree units you'll accumulate.
All right, so they came up with this GDU thing just because it's super simple. Is it perfectly accurate? No way. Because think about a day that, for example, was 50 for a low, and all of a sudden it shot up to 86, but then a cold front came through, so it was only 86 degrees for 10 minutes. Is that the same as if it was 86 degrees for 7 hours straight? Of course not. But we need to have something that is fairly simple and easy, and we find that the difference isn't all that much by the time it gets averaged out over the course of the season. So this is the way we calculate growing degree units, or growing degree days.
Well, Brian mentioned not just crops go by these GDUs or growing degree units, also weeds. We can estimate with a certain number of growing degree units, we'll see different species start to emerge. Well, this is one of them that will come up very early in the season, Can you identify this week's Weed of the Week?
It's no secret that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with your schedule. Field conditions in recent years kept many from timely planting and fertilizing, and when you can't get your fertilizer applied, you lose thousands of dollars in yield potential. If you need flexibility in your fertility application timing, you need a drop tube system from C&R Supply. C&R drop tubes allow you to apply liquid nitrogen in season and place it exactly where your crop needs it. To learn more about low-cost C&R drop tube solutions, visit crsupply.com.
Make sure your farm equipment is season ready with an uptime inspection from your Titan Machinery service professionals. Titan Machinery's team of Case IH certified technicians has the knowledge and experience to find, correct, and prevent mechanical issues that could shut you down during the season. Your planting and harvest windows are short. For genuine Case IH parts and service, schedule an off-season uptime inspection at Titan Machinery today. Titan Machinery, your local Case IH dealer.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
Avoid the V-shaped pattern of injury caused by chemical buildup in your booms. The Express End Cap from Hypro eliminates the dead ends that lead to herbicide buildup and provides easy access to your booms, giving a complete flush between applications. Hypro, helping you spray better.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
One thing we want to talk about on today's program is water quality. And when I think about this, I'm not just thinking about the river or the stream. I'm thinking about the quality of the water that you're putting into your spray tank. We have so many different things that we're trying to deliver into our field, and water is often the carrier. Let's focus on that today.
All right, here are some of the things we want you to think about. First of all, it's how are any of the things in the water interacting with whatever you're putting in. So for example, biological products, herbicides, fungicides. Well, the things that you can test your water for include these: chlorine, calcium, magnesium, copper, iron. So think overall about just chlorine as one thing. Then think about water hardness. And in addition to that, take a look at your water pH.
I first became aware of the pH issue with water back in the 1990s. When we looked at some of the sulfonylurea herbicides and the ALS herbicides that were coming out, they were very particular about what pH the water should be in your spray tank. Now some of them said, well, we've got to have a neutral to slightly higher water pH or we're going to have issues with performance in the field. Others said, well, we're fine, we need a lower water pH or we're going to have some herbicide breakdown in the tank. Now what I mean is herbicide degradation, where you could mix up that spray tank at home, drive out to a field, get the boom folded out, and all of a sudden you're 15 minutes later, maybe a half an hour later from when you put the product in the tank, and now 10% of the product isn't working, or 20% or 30%, and you're not getting the weed control that you were desiring. So that was a big concern for agronomists at that point. Now, when Roundup became the dominant product, well, that wasn't as much of an issue. Roundup liked a little bit lower pH, but for the most part, we were putting in ammonium sulfate and lowering most water pHs down a little bit, and Roundup worked fine. So really, for about 20 years, the whole industry quit talking about water pH, and now we're hearing it again.
I think the reason why we're hearing it now is because of the interaction with some of the biologicals that are out there, both pH and some of those other nutrients that are in the water. Let me just give you an example off our own farm. About 3 years ago, we decided, or mainly I decided, that we were going to move our water tanks off our main farm over to where our field day site is. But what I wasn't even thinking about is, on the main farm, we have well water. On the field day site, we have rural water. Well, what do they do with rural water in our area? They treat it with chlorine. What that means is, yes, we're going to have lower levels of calcium and magnesium. That's nice. But the problem is the pH spikes way up to almost 9 in our case. Plus, we've got that chlorine in there. And why is chlorine in the water? Well, it's in there to kill biologicals, to kill microbes. So if we're throwing beneficial biologicals, some of these products we call naturals, we're throwing them in the water. Well, before you even get to the field, they're dead because of the chlorine. So this is one of the things you absolutely have to know. And I don't care if we're talking in a big spray tank, or let's even say it's right at planting time and you're just mixing up a gallon per acre for your biologicals. Well, if you've got chlorine in there, those things are dead. We also have found out high levels of copper are going to kill the biologicals, and in some well waters there are high levels of copper. So we'd really encourage you, just test your water. I don't care what you're spraying, have your water tested. It's super cheap. You only have to do it once every few years, and then you can find out, okay, what do I actually have in my water and what do I need to neutralize?
Well, it's the same thing, Brand. The water hardness that's in there, the chlorine, the pH, all those things need to get adjusted potentially on your farm. Maybe your water's perfect. But I do know this, you mentioned the biological type products, those natural products, fungi, bacteria. Many of the labels will say, mix us with distilled water. I don't know anybody that's using distilled water for their spray tank. So yes, if you're doing it in a seed treater, maybe people are using distilled water. Even there, I kind of doubt it. I think a lot of tap water gets used. So we do want to test the water. And then you're talking about adjusting things in the water or treating things. I get nervous, how much is that treatment going to cost? But fortunately, it's not expensive at all.
No, so there are a couple of products we'll use. One is called BioPrep that neutralizes the chlorine. What it does is turns the chlorine into chloride. Chloride is a nutrient that your crop needs, so there's no problem with that, and now it doesn't hurt a lot of the other things in that spray solution. There's also a product called WaterRite that we're using, and again, there are many other products out there, so just find something that works for you. But the WaterRite we like because that neutralizes calcium, magnesium, iron, and even copper. Those are basically considered some of the hard water ions, so take a look at all those. And again, we want that pH right. So if you get the pH right, you get the water hardness right, you get the chlorine out of there, all of a sudden you might end up finding, you know what, I thought I had weed resistance with my Roundup or some other herbicide you're using, and you go, oh, wait a second, I think this works a lot better now. We've really seen that across the country because some people say, I have no resistance. Their neighbor right next to them has a major problem. Well, a lot of times it just comes down to the water treatments that they're using.
Brian mentioned a couple products that we use to treat water on our farm, and he didn't mention the cost. It's really only pennies per acre. It's not that expensive at all. We're really happy to find that out because we're often out in the field spraying for things like our weed of the week. And we'll show you how to stop this weed coming up later in the show.
Where we have run the Soil Warrior, we have harvested the best corn we have ever harvested in the history of Wrenwood Farms. Now, I'm kind of always wanting to push the envelope to see what else I can do to help enhance that emergence. Their ride is so much smoother. Their seed placement is even better. Where we had our best emergence and we've had our best yields was where we ran the Soil Warrior.
Success isn't just about maintaining your operation, how you make out for the season, or how much you can get from each acre. It's about doing precisely what needs to be done to feed your crop and grow your legacy, all the way down to the last drop. AgroLiquid Precision Crop Nutrition. Apply less, expect more. Find a retailer at agroliquid.com.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and microbes and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about Decomp at eggbio.solutions.
Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
Challenging field conditions often make harvest difficult. Can your corn head handle it? The GTS X10 corn head from Agra US is a rugged, cost-effective alternative to heavier, more traditional heads. Constructed of durable yet lightweight aluminum, the X10 puts less strain on your combine without losing harvest effectiveness. And it is 40% lighter than traditional heads, reducing field compaction in those less than ideal conditions. For more information, give us a call at 8334-AGRA US.
I've really enjoyed being an agronomist. You get to see a lot of different things over the years, and you know, about the time you think, well, I've probably seen everything out in a soybean field that's going to happen, well, then something new comes up and it keeps things interesting, but they can be kind of expensive problems that pop up, so we want to try and find solutions for them as quick as we can. Well, about 5 years ago, I was out in a soybean field that the farmer had called me and thought he had a Phytophthora root rot problem and had tried lots of different Phytophthora resistance traits and seed treatments and everything he could think of. But when I split open some stems on a field inspection, I found a surprise inside. It was a soybean Gall Midge larvae.
Yep, I remember this too because Darren sent me a picture and goes, hey Brian, what's this? And I said, I have no idea, I've never seen it. Well, guess what? No one had ever seen it. It's a brand new insect. Entomologists are super excited right now because they've discovered a brand new insect. I'm not excited about it at all. I think it's terrible. Where we're seeing this Gall Midge is fortunately in a relatively small area right now, but it seems like it continues to spread each year. Darren found it in southeast South Dakota. We've seen it in Nebraska, in Iowa, in Minnesota. It is moving.
Yeah, it definitely is. And when you think about this particular pest, it's not being controlled by anything that we're using to control other bugs in the field. So they often say, well, nature is going to adapt to our management practices and overcome them eventually. Here's one of those bugs that has overcome the practices that we're doing. So you say, well, I'm putting a seed treatment insecticide on and spraying a foliar insecticide. Won't that take care of it? No. We haven't found really any rate of the neonic seed treatment insecticides that have offered good control of this bug. And foliar, well, I just don't see those foliar applications being super effective. Maybe we'll find something down the road. But let me explain how this bug works. It starts off as a small little fly, and the fly lands on your soybean plant when it's fairly early in the season. It pierces that stem and lays its eggs underneath the skin on that stem. So the eggs are actually inside the soybean stem, while a foliar application is not going to contain those insects once they're in the stem. So you would have to kill that fly. So the biggest challenge, like Brian said, with a brand new insect is we didn't even know what the fly looked like. So we were putting out sticky traps, and universities are putting out sticky traps. Eventually we caught some of the flies. They're really a cool looking bug as long as they're not in your field. You've got to control those flies. Well, they fly over several weeks. How on earth are you going to do that? We haven't figured that answer out just yet.
When those eggs are inside that stem, eventually they're going to hatch, and then it becomes this worm that hollows out the inside of the stem. It's very possible that it could completely kill that plant. The plant could tip over. If you're out in your fields, where you should look first is on the field borders that are right next to where soybeans were planted last year. It does not seem like the bug moves very far, fortunately at this point, and we are seeing it typically on the end rows, by far the worst. Now we have seen, like I say, 100% yield losses in extreme cases, but it's usually limited to just a few acres in the field. Darren mentioned in terms of the neonic seed treatments, yeah, we haven't seen much there. There are other insecticides that are being experimented with pre-emerge or as a seed treatment, but foliar, we have had some farmers tell us they've used really, really high rates we can't legally talk about, foliar. And when they've done that, they've had so much residual there, it's either killed or at least repelled those flies. So that's one of the things that is going to be studied going forward.
The big thing that I would say is you never know when something new is going to pop up in your soybean fields or any other crop that you're raising. So what I like to do when I get out in these investigations is dig up the root system, take a look and see if you see anything out of place there, then split some stems open and see what the inside of that plant looks like. Oftentimes that may give you an answer as to what's happening in your field.
Well, Gall Midge can certainly be a problem on anyone's farm, as can our Weed of the Week. But we'll tell you how to stop this week's weed coming up next.
Increase your productivity with Hypro's dual react control system. The dual nozzle body design allows you to drive at the speed you want while maintaining the rate and droplet size you need. Hypro, helping you spray better.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Weed of the Week is a winter annual. It's henbit.
It's one that's really common out in reduced till and no-till fields. And when you think about it, if you were doing some tillage, a lot of times you're wiping out those winter annuals. If you say, I've never seen that weed, that's probably why. You're probably doing some tillage. Or you could be doing some fall herbicide treatments. Now that's gonna probably take in a very, very small percentage of growers out there doing fall herbicide treatments, but those who are have been really happy controlling weeds like henbit.
Yeah, when you say that, I think about mare's tail, pennycress. There are a whole bunch of winter annuals. We do a lot of fall spraying now, and in our strip till acres, or what we used to have as a no-till, boy, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. Now, many of those products that you could use can still be used in the spring. So if you say, oh, okay, it's spring now, don't tell me fall was the best time, just tell me what I can do right now. Hey, you can get henbit under control with a good burn down.
All right, let's start though with corn. What are you gonna do if you wanna go burn down?
Well, I like having Roundup in the mix, and I would add that to Verdict. When you've got Sharpen, Roundup, and Outlook in there, now Outlook doesn't have the contact activity, but the Sharpen and the Roundup sure do.
Yep, dicamba is real good as well. Post-emerge corn.
I like Status if you haven't already used up dicamba.
Yep, okay, then you get to soybeans. What do you suggest?
Well, in soybeans, I like our 3 pre-program. Now, you could add Roundup to that and do it as a burn down type treatment as well.
Yep, post-emerge, Roundup, Liberty, dicamba, 2,4-D, lots of choices there, all depends on your trait. Then let's go to wheat.
Well, I like Sharpen there. Again, you could tank mix that with Roundup for more burn down power, but a good strong 2-ounce rate of Sharpen is pretty good if you're mixing some oil with it.
Yeah, hopefully post-emerge, you're able to use the SUs, the sulfonylureas. You don't have a resistance issue or anything like that. Otherwise, Husky is pretty effective when it comes to henbit control.
That's all the time we have for our Weed of the Week, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
Introducing the all-new Diamant Cornhead from Capello, USA. With a revolutionary design, highly innovative for its class, we have painstakingly designed every component down to the smallest detail to maximize your harvest efficiency. This gives you unprecedented standards in operation and performance. For more information about this beast, available only in our new gray poly, call 855-CAPELLO or visit CapelloUSA.com to find a dealer near you. Capello, wherever you are, we are.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about decomp at eggbio.solutions.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
More choices, more money. With Bayer Plus Rewards, you choose from our broad portfolio of high-performance products. Earn more money on the eligible products that are right for your farm. And use our new portal to see your purchases, track your rewards, and decide how you want to use them. Visit mybayerplus.com to sign in and start earning. That's the advantage of more control in your hands. That's the plus.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
At Harvest, you have one goal: finding the perfect flow of grain from the field to the bin. Case IH axial flow combines are engineered for matched capacity to deliver proven grain savings, so you can keep efficiency flowing smoothly. Find yours with the Case IH axial flow.
It's that time of year again where everyone's excited to get into the tractor. However, I'm going to advise you to get out of the tractor a lot more this year. I'll explain in today's Iron Talk. Planting season is always a rush, especially this year after all the prevent plant last season. Unless you have enough manpower to have someone else walking around in your fields and doing a lot of digging, it's your job to get out of the tractor cab fairly often to make sure that you're getting the job done right. Here's a tip that my dad gave me many years ago. Think of everything you do in terms of how many dollars per hour the job pays. It may only take 15 or 30 minutes to get everything set just right on the piece of equipment you're running, but if it saves you from something that costs you even 1 bushel of yield on 1,000 acres, at $3 corn, that's a job that pays you at least $6,000 an hour. Here are 3 specific things to check this spring. First, if you do tillage, check the tillage floor. Sweep away the top few inches you just tilled up and make sure there's an even floor underneath. Second, seed bed conditions. Your seed bed should be crumbly and not too fluffy or too sticky. Finally, there's seed depth. If your seed depth is not the same for every single seed in the field when you're planting corn or other crops, you won't maximize yield. In fact, you will lose a lot of yield. Plants that emerge several days late produce much smaller ears and less pods than the plants that emerge together on the first day. This isn't just a 1 bushel kind of loss, it could be a 20 bushel or more problem. It's a $1,000 per hour job, so don't miss it. I know you're hustling right now to get everything done timely this year, but I encourage you, get out of the tractor more often. Check on things that can save you the trouble of fixing them later, and check on things that give your field the best chance at making a profit this year. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's our time for today, but before we go, I would encourage you to check out the Ag PhD radio show this week. It's on Sirius XM channel 147 at 2 p.m. Central each weekday.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.